Here's an expanded version of the Clean Up Your Mind section, structured in the style of Jordan Peterson, with a deep dive into the concept and practical applications. Your mind is a battleground, and whether you realize it or not, there is a constant war being waged inside you. It's a war between order and chaos, discipline and destruction, clarity and confusion. And if you don't actively take control of this war, if you don't tend to your mind with the same level of care that you would give to something you truly value, it will be overrun with disorder. Think about what happens to a house when it's neglected. At first, maybe it's just a little dust accumulating in the corners, a few dishes piling up in the sink. It doesn't seem like a big deal, but give it enough time, and suddenly the house is unlivable. The walls are covered in mold, the foundation is rotting, and the place is infested with creatures that thrive in filth. The same thing happens to your mind. If you don't clean it up, if you don't take responsibility for what occupies your thoughts, it will decay into something that is no longer under your control. And once you reach that point, it becomes incredibly difficult to turn things around. Negative thinking is insidious because it disguises itself as rationality. It tells you that you're just being realistic, that you're preparing yourself for disappointment, that you're avoiding unnecessary risks. And to some extent, that's true. Thinking critically about potential dangers is useful, but there's a fine line between caution and self-destruction. If you're constantly filling your mind with thoughts of failure, inadequacy, and despair, you are programming yourself to act in ways that reinforce those beliefs. You are setting yourself up for the very failures you fear. Imagine someone who has spent years telling themselves they're worthless. Every setback reinforces this belief. Every rejection seems like proof. Over time, they stop trying. They stop aiming at anything. And when you stop aiming at something meaningful, life becomes unbearable. It's not just a mental issue, it's a practical problem. If you believe you're incapable, you won't put in the effort required to become capable. If you believe that nothing good will happen, you won't take the actions necessary to make good things happen. The result, a self-fulfilling prophecy of misery. So what do you do about it? How do you clean up your mind before it cleans you out? The first step is to identify the patterns of negative thinking that have taken root. This requires brutal honesty. You need to sit down and ask yourself, what do I tell myself on a daily basis? What kind of thoughts do I allow to dominate my mind? If you were to write down everything that runs through your head in a given day, what would that list look like? Would it be filled with self-criticism, doubt, fear, and resentment? Or would it be filled with thoughts of possibility, hope, and responsibility? If you're constantly feeding yourself a diet of negativity, why would you expect your life to be anything other than negative? Once you've identified these patterns, the next step is to challenge them. And I mean really challenge them. Don't just accept negative thoughts as truth. Ask yourself, is this actually true? Or is it just something I've conditioned myself to believe? If you think I'm not good enough, ask yourself, according to whom? If you think I always fail, ask yourself, always? Every single time? Or am I just focusing on my failures and ignoring my successes? The human mind is naturally biased toward negativity because it evolved to prioritize survival. Our ancestors needed to be hyper-aware of threats, predators, dangers, risks, because ignoring them could mean death. But in the modern world, this instinct works against us. We're no longer running from lions in the jungle, but we act as if every minor setback is a life-threatening catastrophe. If you don't actively train yourself to think differently, you will default to a negative outlook, and that outlook will shape your choices, your behavior, and ultimately, your life. The next step is to replace those negative thoughts with something better. But be careful here. This isn't about mindless optimism or pretending that everything is fine when it isn't. That's not helpful. What you need is a structured, realistic way of thinking that is aimed at improvement. Instead of saying, I'm a failure, you say, I have failed in the past, but I am capable of learning and growing. Instead of saying, I'm not good enough, you say, I'm not where I want to be yet, but I can work toward getting there. You don't lie to yourself. You reframe your thoughts in a way that pushes you forward rather than holding you back. This is why setting goals is so important. If your mind is a garden, your goals are the plants you choose to cultivate. If you don't actively plant something worthwhile, weeds will take over by default. And weeds, in this case, are self-doubt, laziness, resentment, and fear. But if you give yourself a target, something meaningful to work toward, Then you give your mind a reason to focus on something productive. It's not enough to simply try to eliminate negative thinking. You need to actively replace it with something stronger. This is why people who develop a sense of purpose, whether it's through their career, their relationships, their personal development, or their contributions to the world, tend to be more resilient. They don't have time to indulge in endless negativity because they're too busy building something meaningful. And let's be clear, this isn't easy. It's not a quick fix. You don't just wake up one day and suddenly have a perfectly disciplined mind. It takes work. It takes daily effort. It takes constant self-awareness. But the alternative is far worse. The alternative is to let your mind descend into chaos, to let negativity dictate your actions, to live a life that is far below what you are capable of. And that's not a life worth living. So take responsibility. Clean up your mind before it cleans you out. Identify the toxic thoughts that are holding you back. Challenge them, replace them with something better, and aim at something meaningful. If you do that, you won't just think differently, you will act differently, you will live differently, and you will become the kind of person who can face the challenges of life with strength and purpose. Because the truth is, no one else is going to do this for you. No one else can. You are the only one who has the power to clean up your mind. So start today. Taking responsibility for your life is one of the most powerful things you can do, but it's also one of the hardest. It requires you to confront uncomfortable truths, to stop blaming external circumstances, and to accept that where you are right now is, to a significant degree, a result of the choices you have made. That's not easy to hear, and most people would rather avoid that kind of self-examination altogether. It's far more comfortable to shift the blame, to point at society, at parents, at bad luck, at the unfairness of the world, than it is to look in the mirror and acknowledge, I am responsible for my actions, my thoughts, and my outcomes. But here's the reality. If you refuse to take responsibility, you give up control. And if you give up control, you surrender the ability to change your circumstances. Life is undeniably unfair. Some people are born into privilege, others into hardship. Some face significant obstacles, illness, tragedy, loss, while others seem to have an easier path. That's true. But what's also true is that focusing on the unfairness of life does absolutely nothing to improve your situation. It only serves to justify inaction. You can spend years resenting the hand you've been dealt, or you can decide to play that hand to the best of your ability. And that decision, whether to be a victim of circumstance or to take responsibility for what you can control, is one of the most important choices you will ever make. Taking responsibility does not mean blaming yourself for everything that has ever gone wrong. That's not useful and it's not accurate. What it does mean is recognizing the areas of your life that you do have power over and taking ownership of them. It means acknowledging that regardless of what has happened to you, you have the ability to choose how you respond. And in that choice lies your freedom. Consider your thoughts. If your mind is filled with self-doubt, negativity, and fear, who is responsible for that? Many people would say, well, I think this way because of how I was raised, because of what others have told me, because of past failures. And while those factors certainly play a role, they do not have to be permanent determinants of your thinking. You have the ability to challenge and change your thoughts. No one else can do that for you. If you continue to indulge in negative thinking, that's on you. That's your responsibility. The same principle applies to your actions. If you're in a job you hate, but you do nothing to improve your skills, seek out new opportunities, or take risks, then your dissatisfaction is to a large extent your own doing. If your relationships are toxic, but you keep choosing to stay in them, that's your responsibility. If your health is suffering, but you refuse to adopt better habits, that's your responsibility. This isn't about shaming yourself. It's about recognizing that every day you are making choices that shape your reality. And if you don't like your reality, the only way to change it is by changing your choices. One of the greatest dangers of refusing to take responsibility is that it leads to a passive existence. When you blame external forces for everything that's wrong in your life, you become a spectator rather than a participant. You wait for circumstances to improve, for someone to rescue you, for the world to change in your favor. But that's not how life works. No one is coming to save you. No one is going to hand you the life you want. The only way to create a better future is to take an active role in shaping it. This is why discipline is so crucial. People talk about motivation as if it's some magical force that will suddenly appear and propel them toward success. But motivation is unreliable. It comes and goes. Discipline, on the other hand, is what separates those who achieve their goals from those who don't. And discipline is entirely within your control. No one else decides whether you get out of bed early to work on your goals. No one else decides whether you push through discomfort to develop new skills. That's on you. And when you start treating discipline as a responsibility rather than an option, your life will change. Taking responsibility also means owning your mistakes. Everyone makes them. No one gets through life without failing, without making bad decisions, without hurting others at some point. But what matters is how you respond to those mistakes. Do you deny them, justify them, or blame others? Or do you acknowledge them, learn from them, and strive to do better? The people who grow the most in life are the ones who are willing to look at their own flaws honestly and make corrections. The people who stay stuck are the ones who refuse to admit they have any. This is particularly important when it comes to relationships. If you find yourself constantly blaming others for your problems, you need to ask yourself a hard question. What is my role in this? Because if you're always the victim, always the one being wronged, always the one suffering because of someone else's actions, then you are effectively saying that you have no control over your own life. And that's not true. Relationships are a two-way street. If your relationships are dysfunctional, you need to examine what you are bringing into them. Your attitudes, your behaviors, your patterns. Taking responsibility in this area doesn't mean tolerating mistreatment or blaming yourself for other people's actions. It means recognizing what you can do differently to create healthier dynamics. Another crucial aspect of responsibility is self-education. Too many people go through life on autopilot, consuming whatever information is placed in front of them, never questioning, never seeking to expand their understanding. But in the age of limitless information, ignorance is a choice. If you don't understand something, whether it's finances, health, communication, or any other area of life, you have the ability to learn. You can read, you can ask questions, you can seek out mentors. And if you don't, that's on you. No one is responsible for your education but you. No one is responsible for making you informed, competent, and capable. That is something you must take ownership of. Taking responsibility is not just about achieving success, it's about building character. When you take responsibility for your life, you become someone others can rely on. You become the person who steps up rather than steps back. You become someone who others trust, who they look to for guidance, who they respect. And that kind of person is invaluable, not just to society, but to themselves. Because when you live with responsibility, you live with purpose. You know that your actions matter. You know that you have the power to shape your future. And that knowledge gives you a sense of control and confidence that no external circumstance can take away. There's a reason why people who take responsibility tend to be more successful, more fulfilled, and more respected. It's because they are actively engaged in their own lives. They don't sit around waiting for things to change. They don't waste time complaining about what they can't control. They focus on what they can control, and they do something about it. They build, they grow, they improve. And in doing so, they set themselves apart from the vast majority of people who are content to let life happen to them. The reality is that you have two choices. You can either take responsibility for your life, or you can let life happen to you. You can be the person who makes things happen, or you can be the person who makes excuses. And that decision, whether to own your circumstances or be a victim of them, will determine the quality of your life. No one else can make that choice for you. No one else can force you to take responsibility. But if you do, if you truly commit to taking ownership of your thoughts, your actions, and your future, then you will discover something incredible. You are far more powerful than you ever realized. Fear is one of the most powerful forces in human psychology. It has shaped civilizations, driven human evolution, and kept people alive in dangerous situations. But in the modern world, fear is often less about survival and more about avoidance. People let fear dictate their choices, their actions, and ultimately their entire lives. And here's the hard truth. If you allow fear to control you, you will never reach your full potential. You will stay stuck, hesitant, and trapped in a life that is far below what you are capable of. Fear manifests in many forms. Some people fear failure. They don't take risks because they're terrified of making mistakes, of looking foolish, of proving to themselves and others that they're not as capable as they hoped. Others fear rejection. They hold back in relationships, in friendships, in their careers, because they're afraid of being judged or abandoned. Some fear change itself, the unknown, the uncertainty of stepping outside their comfort zone, and so they cling to what is familiar, even if that familiarity is making them miserable. But here's what people fail to realize. Fear will never go away. It will always be there, whispering doubts into your mind, trying to keep you small. And if you spend your life waiting for fear to disappear before you take action, you will never take action. The key to breaking free is not eliminating fear. It's learning to act in spite of it. Think about what happens when you allow fear to control your decisions. You avoid difficult conversations because you don't want conflict. You stay in situations that are unhealthy because the alternative is uncertain. You turn down opportunities because you don't believe you're ready. And every time you give in to fear, you reinforce its power over you. You train yourself to retreat instead of advance, to stay stuck instead of move forward. And eventually, fear doesn't even have to try anymore. You've built your own mental prison and locked yourself inside. The first step in breaking free is recognizing that fear is not reality. Fear is a projection. It's your mind imagining the worst possible outcome and reacting as if that outcome is already happening. But how often do the things you fear actually come true? How many times have you hesitated, convinced that something terrible would happen, only to realize later that your fear was completely unfounded? Your mind is an expert at exaggerating danger, and if you don't challenge those fearful thoughts, you will believe them as if they are absolute truth. So, what do? How do you stop letting fear control you? You start by confronting it. You deliberately put yourself in situations that scare you, not recklessly, but intentionally, with the goal of proving to yourself that fear is not the barrier you think it is. Imagine someone who is terrified of public speaking. They avoid every opportunity to speak in front of a crowd, telling themselves that they're just not good at it. But every time they avoid it, the fear grows stronger. Now, imagine if they did the opposite. Instead of avoiding it, they started small, speaking up in meetings, practicing in front of a mirror, giving short talks in front of a few people. The more they expose themselves to the thing they fear, the more they realize that it doesn't have the power over them that they thought. They might still feel nervous, but they learn that they can handle that nervousness. They learn that fear is just a feeling, not a command. This applies to every area of life. If you fear rejection, you must face it. Put yourself in situations where you risk hearing no. If you fear failure, you must fail deliberately, repeatedly, until failure becomes nothing more than a stepping stone to improvement. If you fear uncertainty, you must train yourself to embrace it, to see it not as a threat, but as an opportunity for growth. One of the biggest lies fear tells you is that you need more preparation before you act. How many people have spent years waiting to be ready before they start their dream project, apply for a job, or pursue a relationship? The truth is, you will never feel 100% ready. You will always have doubts. But the only way to become ready is to start. Action creates confidence. The more you do, the more capable you become. And as you become more capable, your fear diminishes. Not because fear has disappeared, but because you have proven to yourself that you can handle whatever comes. There's another crucial aspect to this. The stories you tell yourself about fear. Most people treat fear as a stop sign. They think, I feel afraid, therefore I shouldn't do this. But what if you changed that interpretation? What if you saw fear as a signal that you're doing something important? What if you trained yourself to think, fear means I'm growing. Fear means I'm pushing myself beyond my comfort zone. Fear means I'm on the right path. The most successful people in the world feel fear just like everyone else. The difference is they don't let it stop them. They don't see fear as an excuse. They see it as a challenge to overcome. And because they face fear head on, they achieve things that others only dream about. Think about this. If you had no fear, what would you do? What kind of life would you create for yourself? What opportunities would you pursue? Now ask yourself this, is fear really a good enough reason to hold yourself back from those things? Is a temporary feeling of discomfort worth sacrificing your potential? Most people are so afraid of failing that they never start. But what they don't realize is that in refusing to take risks, they are guaranteeing failure. They are failing by default. The person who never applies for the job has already lost the opportunity. The person who never pursues their passion has already given up on their dream. The person who never opens their heart to others has already chosen loneliness. In trying to avoid failure, they have ensured it. So if failure is inevitable, if you are going to experience setbacks and disappointments no matter what, why not fail forward? Why not take action and learn from it? Why not push through fear and come out stronger on the other side? Another thing to understand about fear is that it thrives in inaction. When you sit around thinking about all the things that could go wrong, fear multiplies. But when you take action, when you do something, even if it's small, you disrupt that cycle. You prove to yourself that you can handle the situation, and suddenly the fear that once felt overwhelming starts to lose its grip. This is why movement is so important. If you're feeling paralyzed by fear, take a step. Any step. If you're afraid to start a project, do something small to get the ball rolling. If you're afraid to talk to someone, say a single word to break the silence. If you're afraid of failure, deliberately put yourself in a situation where failure is possible, just to see that it won't destroy you. Action is the antidote to fear. At the end of the day, fear is nothing more than a barrier between you and the life you want. And the only way to tear down that barrier is to walk through it. Every time you face fear, you weaken its power. Every time you act despite fear, you grow stronger, and eventually you reach a point where fear no longer controls you, you control it. So stop waiting. Stop letting fear be the master of your life. The future belongs to those who are willing to step into uncertainty, to take risks, to move forward, even when their hearts are pounding. The future belongs to those who refuse to let fear dictate their actions. That future can be yours, but only if you're willing to take the first step. Life is full of suffering, chaos, and uncertainty. Every person at some point will experience loss, disappointment, failure, and pain. This is not a possibility, it is an inevitability. And in the face of this reality, people have two choices. They can allow themselves to be broken by it, consumed by meaninglessness and despair, or they can build something strong enough to withstand it. They can construct a fortress of meaning, a structure so solid that no storm, no tragedy, no hardship can fully dismantle it. The world today is plagued by a crisis of meaning. Many people drift aimlessly, moving from one distraction to the next, numbing themselves with entertainment, addiction, or empty pleasures, all in an attempt to avoid confronting the deeper question, what is my life about? Without meaning, life feels hollow. It feels unbearable. And when people lack a sense of purpose, they become vulnerable to nihilism, depression, and despair. They become weak, unable to face hardship with resilience, unable to persevere in the face of difficulty. But meaning is not something you find, it is something you build. You do not stumble upon it one day by accident. You create it through your actions, your commitments, your discipline, and your responsibility. You lay the foundation brick by brick through the choices you make every day. And the stronger your foundation, the more unshakable your fortress will be. The first step in building a fortress of meaning is to take responsibility for your life. You cannot build anything of value if you are unwilling to claim ownership of your circumstances. If you blame others, your parents, society, fate, for your problems, you will never develop the strength necessary to create something meaningful. Meaning requires agency. It requires the recognition that no matter what has happened to you in the past, you have the power to shape your future. You are not just a passive observer of your life, you are its architect. And if you do not take responsibility for constructing something meaningful, no one else will do it for you. The second pillar of meaning is discipline. People often think that meaning is about passion, about feeling inspired, about chasing what excites them. But that is a shallow and temporary approach. Passion fades. Inspiration is fleeting, but discipline, the ability to commit to something consistently, to show up even when you do not feel like it, is what turns fleeting passion into deep purpose. If you want to build a meaningful life, you need to develop the discipline to pursue it, even when it is difficult, even when it is uncomfortable, even when you would rather take the easy path. Consider a person who wants to become a great musician. If they only practice when they feel inspired, they will never develop mastery. If they only play when it is fun, they will never push through the hard, frustrating process of learning complex techniques. But if they approach their craft with discipline, if they show up every day, regardless of how they feel, they will build something lasting. And that discipline, that commitment gives their work meaning. It turns their music into something real, something substantial, something that matters. The same is true for every area of life. If you want to build a meaningful relationship, you must commit to it even when it is challenging. If you want to find meaning in your work, you must dedicate yourself to improving even when progress feels slow. The third essential element of meaning is the pursuit of truth. Many people build their lives on lies, on illusions, on comfortable falsehoods, on avoidance. They tell themselves that everything is fine when it is not. They convince themselves that their problems are not their fault. They refuse to confront difficult realities because doing so would require change, and change is frightening. But meaning cannot be built on falsehood. A fortress built on a weak foundation will crumble at the first sign of hardship. If you want to create something truly unshakable, you must be willing to face the truth, even when it is painful. You must be willing to examine your own flaws, to admit when you are wrong, to seek knowledge instead of confirmation. Truth is not just about intellectual honesty. It is about aligning your actions with what is good, with what is just, with what is right. A life filled with deception, with dishonesty, with betrayal, whether of others or of oneself, will always be hollow. But a life grounded in truth, in integrity, in the pursuit of what is genuinely meaningful, will have a strength that cannot be easily destroyed. The fourth cornerstone of meaning is service. A life that is solely focused on personal gratification, on self-indulgence, will always feel empty in the end. Real meaning comes from contributing to something beyond yourself. It comes from taking on responsibility, not just for your own well-being, but for the well-being of others. It comes from committing yourself to a cause, to a mission, to a duty that is greater than your own personal comfort. This is why parents often find deep meaning in raising children, despite the immense sacrifice it requires. It is why people who dedicate themselves to meaningful work, whether that be in science, in art, in education, in leadership, find a sense of fulfillment that those who merely chase pleasure never experience. Meaning is built through sacrifice. It is built through the willingness to give up immediate gratification for the sake of something greater. And the more you serve, the stronger your fortress of meaning becomes. But building meaning is not just about grand gestures. It is not just about pursuing some enormous goal or dedicating your life to a singular mission. It is about how you live every day. It is about the way you treat people. It is about the way you carry yourself, the way you approach your work, the way you cultivate discipline and character in the small moments of life. Meaning is found in the way you do even the most mundane tasks, with intention, with purpose, with excellence. Too many people wait for meaning to arrive, as if it is something that will simply happen to them. They drift through life hoping that one day something will click. But meaning does not just appear. It must be forged. It must be built through struggle, through discipline, through sacrifice, through truth. It must be cultivated every day through the choices you make and the way you live. And the reason this is so important, the reason you must build a fortress of meaning, is because life will test you. It will challenge you in ways you cannot predict. It will throw obstacles in your path, break things you love, take things from you that you thought were permanent. And if you have not built something solid, you will collapse under the weight of suffering. But if you have meaning, if you have constructed something real, something strong, you will endure. You will not be easily shaken. You will not be lost when hardship comes, because you will know why you are here. You will know what you stand for. You will know that your life has purpose, that your actions matter, that your suffering is not meaningless. So do not wait. Start building now. Take responsibility for your life. Develop discipline. Seek truth. Serve something greater than yourself. Build a life so strong that no storm can bring it down. Construct a fortress of meaning so powerful that nothing, no failure, no tragedy, no suffering can ever truly destroy it.